Yes, I know that. Oh, that's charming. I'm sorry, I didn't know you wrote that.
I didn't. That was Mozart.
Hola, comrades! Today's topic of interest, Amadeus. One of the greatest films of the 80s, Amadeus is a biopic about Mozart. Except it's not. Director Milos Forman had a complicated life, achieving both incredible highs, such as his celebrated Jack Nicholson starring adaptation of Ken Kesey's classic One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and great lows, such as when he lost the friendship of Arthur Miller when he agreed to cooperate with the McCarthy hearings. But his greatest mark on the cultural landscape was this film, which is told from the perspective of Antonio Salieri, a lesser composer from the same time period. The single decision makes the film achingly heartbreaking, while also raising interesting questions about the nature of biopics and, more broadly, the tragedy of the observer. The normal biopic suffers from a flaw inherent in the format. The genre venerates great men, or less commonly, great women. The protagonist can be positioned as an underdog, or they could meet a tragic fate, but the basic conceit of making a movie about someone is that this person is obviously going to achieve great success. If they did not, the movie would not be about them. So there's no tension in that regard. These films fall into the same pattern. The protagonist suffers, but in the end, they're able to rise to the top and make a major difference. I like Gandhi, and I love Lawrence of Arabia, but even those films do not escape the genre's aridity. But Amadeus does. Because this is not a story about Mozart. It is not even a story about Salieri. It's a story about talent. It's a story about awareness. It's a story about misfortune. It's a story about having an unceasingly critical eye that allows you to grasp your limitations, even if you know you will never be able to overcome them. Mozart is portrayed as this idiot playboy who has nothing in his favor except gobs of talent. Salieri, meanwhile, is portrayed as having everything else. He's intelligent. He works hard. He's everything a musician is supposed to be. But he knows he'll never be anything more than a mediocre composer. This concept is just incredible. It was enough of a draw to make this film a commercial hit, despite it being a costume drama running almost 3 hours. What is often missed about this film, however, is that this competition is more internal than external. Mozart is not universally praised. When he plays for the Austrian Emperor Joseph II, the Emperor criticizes his composition for having too many notes.
I don't understand. There are just as many notes, Majesty, as are required, neither more nor less.
Well, my dear fellow, there are, in fact, only so many notes the ear can hear in the course of an evening.
Salieri, however, is painfully aware of how great Mozart's compositions are, and how they vastly surpass anything he will ever write. This resembles the second best song in Hamilton, Wait For It, in which Burr laments how Hamilton, despite, or perhaps because of, being reckless and unfettered, has surpassed him. But Burr doesn't loathe Hamilton then. He doesn't loathe him until Hamilton supports Jefferson, a man Hamilton has never liked, against him in the election of 1800. This is more grounded. The average person is not Hamilton, the tragic hero who rises only to be brought down by flaws that are intrinsically related to his rise. In Hamilton's case, his ambition, his drive to always have more. The average person is more like Burr, who knows someone like Hamilton, but is defiantly not Hamilton. Someone who is always left in the background because the expectations and burdens on them are such that they cannot take the same risks as Hamilton. Burr is a more interesting character than Hamilton, but Burr is only an interesting character because of how he foils Hamilton. Without Hamilton, Burr is only a mid to high level sleazy politician. But set opposed to Hamilton, Burr's arc becomes heartrending. He comes from a similar position as Hamilton. Their political ideologies are not that different, and they both lost their parents at an early age. But Hamilton came from nothing to become one of the defining voices of early America, whereas Burr, despite all his caution and scheming, did not. However, the position of Salieri is different from Burr despite the obvious similarities. Subtly different in some ways, tremendously different in others. And the effect of these differences is to redefine the conflict from being grounded and human to being lyrical and cosmic. This is why the dramatic Baroque direction and art style fit splendidly. The central conflict in Amadeus isn't really between Mozart and Salieri. Mozart doesn't really enter the equation, actually. He is, despite Tom Hulce's great performance, more of an idea than a fully formed character. The conflict is between Salieri and God. This is evident from the start of the film. Salieri makes a promise to God that if God makes him a successful composer, he will dedicate his life to God. At first he believes that God has accepted his promise, as his father, who hated the idea of his son being a composer, dies abruptly. That this is not the case does not bother Salieri, nor should it. This is a rather selfish request to make. No, what bothers Salieri is that he believes that God instead decided to give the talent of composing to someone incredibly less deserving, that being Mozart. The final cosmic insult against Salieri comes when Mozart dies while working with Salieri. This convinces Salieri that God hates him so viscerally that he is willing to strike down Mozart, onto which he has bestowed the gift of composing, to stop Salieri from becoming successful. Because of this perspective, the problem with Mozart to Salieri isn't anything Mozart does, the problem is that Mozart exists. This is what drives him to want to kill Mozart, and this is the great difference between Salieri and Aaron Burr. Though Burr has a complicated relationship with Hamilton, the very fact of Hamilton's existence does not drive him to extremes. The comparison with the ostensibly similar Burr brings Salieri's situation into sharp relief. This is not a man who strives to be in the room where it happens. This is a man who knows he will never be where and who he wants to be, and he rages against that fact. Unlike others, including Mozart himself, he understands Mozart's talent, which makes his situation substantially worse. He is able to understand great art, but he is cursed to never be able to produce it. Unlike Burr, who is constantly on the verge of greatness, but is always surpassed by Hamilton, Salieri is doomed to be nothing more than an observer to Mozart's life. Interestingly, it's not hard to draw a line between Salieri and those who interact with biopics, whether as a director and crew or merely as viewers. Because biopics are about so-called great men, the films put their protagonists up on a pedestal, but whether because of, on the part of the filmmakers, insight on their core figure, or whether because of, on the part of the average filmgoer, mere historical hindsight, those who interact with the biopics have a clearer view of their main characters than those characters have of themselves. It's ironic. We position these characters as stronger or smarter or cleverer than the average person, but oddly we also position ourselves above them, looking down on them. When this is done poorly, it can be smug, but when it's done well in a melancholy biopic, it can be downright tragic. We care about the protagonist, and we want them to succeed, but we're trapped in the role of the observer. There is nothing we can do to help them. It's a little like when you're watching a horror movie, and you scream at the protagonist to leave the haunted house, but you know that they never will. But this is more serious than that. The problem is not with an action the character takes, but rather with who the character is. In Hamilton, the others scream at Hamilton to not cheat on Eliza, and they stand not only for themselves, but also for us. The observer starts to resent the protagonist and claims that they would not make the same mistakes as the protagonist, but even if that is true, they will never get the chance because they do not possess the protagonist's talent, so they are left to despair and wish. This is a lot like Salieri. While he is more antagonistic toward Mozart than the typical observer is toward the protagonist of a standard biopic, he too is left to realize that his greater awareness will only cause him pain because he does not possess Mozart's talent. This is not his story. He wants it to be, but in the end, there is nothing he can do but accept that it isn't. In the end, there is nothing he can do to escape his role as the observer.
These were first and only drafts of music. But they showed no corrections of any kind. Not one. He had simply written down music already finished in his head. Page after page of it, as if he were just taking dictation.
Salieri does not hate Mozart's music. Rather, he hates how much he loves that music. He hates that it was made by an oaf like Mozart. If he could, like the other characters, not recognize Mozart's talent, then he would not have been driven to despair and cosmic rage. But he lucidly understands the quality of the music. The film's most effective drama comes from how it scoffs at the idea of meritocracy. Success in this film is not about working hard. It is not about perseverance and determination and courage. It is about talent, and if you don't have it, then you're doomed to mediocrity. The common adage is that comedy is tragedy plus time, but Amadeus has a different approach. In this film, tragedy is darker comedy plus ambition. That Mozart possesses genius despite doing nothing to deserve it is darkly comedic. What makes the situation tragic is Salieri's ambition to fight fate. He deserves to succeed more than Mozart, but he never gets there. He attempts to make up for the difference in talent, but his attempts founder. An absurdly unjust situation is comedic, but a character attempting to fight against that situation because it causes them strife and pain and sorrow and suffering is dramatic. If they succeed, it can be triumphant. But here, Salieri accepts that he was never going to succeed. He argues that he was destined to fail, and that is bleakly, pallidly tragic. Anyway, if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more haunting, cutting content. Also, don't forget to like, and comment, and subscribe, all that genius stuff. Adios, comrades!